Thank you.
All right, cool. So we are recording. Great. So hi, I'm Heather Shirey, and this is part of this class. It's called A History of Street Art. We're at the University of St. Thomas. We are here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Kurt, you are in New York, right? You're in Queens?
That's correct. Well, I live in Newark, New Jersey right now.
You're
so I'm sitting here.
Okay. Coming to us from Newark, New Jersey. Great, thanks.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Kurt Boone. Kurt Boone is a New York and New Jersey-based documentary photographer and a poet, and an author of many books about street art and street culture more broadly. I first met Kurt by social media in the summer of 2020. At that time, and then still today, we're both really committed and interested in documenting and preserving images of graffiti and street art created as an act of protest and an expression of solidarity during the summer of the 2020 uprising in response to the murder of George Floyd. And at that time, Kurt really generously shared some of his work with our urban art mapping George Floyd and anti-racist street art database. And our research team interviewed him that summer, and we learned so much about his life and his work as a documentarian and an author. Then Kurt came and visited us in the Twin Cities in May of 2021 to photograph George Floyd Square and photograph street art and attend a number of events and gatherings and protests that he documented that marked the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. Kurt is a New York City native. He knows the streets very well. In 1990, he started working as a foot messenger, which required him to move through the streets and through the subways constantly. Courier magazine wrote an article about Kurt and featured him on the cover with a headline that said, "Nobody knows the gritty streets of New York City better than Kurt Boone." And I have no doubt it is true. I'm going to share my screen and show you some of his books.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen, and I'm going to show one more thing, Kurt, and I'm going to hand it over to you, okay? So let me get this going so you can see images. We've got some book covers here you can see. So these, you can see this, right?
Yes, I can see those.
Cool.
Yeah.
So these are some of Kurt's books, not all of them. These are some of the books. You can see Asphalt Warrior, that's Kurt on the cover. He's written about the culture, the visual culture of messenger bags, New York City street portraiture. Those of you studying street art in this class, you'll be especially interested in aerosol culture, a day at the Graffiti Hall of Fame and fresh wood plywood, New York City. On the bottom left, this is going to be really meaningful to all of you who watch Style Wars next week, because on the bottom left, on the left, that's Say Adams, who is a artist who appears in Style Wars, still an artist today, painted some work in St. Paul, and that's Marcia Cooper.
Marcia Cooper, also
yeah, famous documentarian of street art from especially working in the 70s and 80s. So that's Martha Cooper looking at Kurt's book, which is pretty cool. And then that's a book of Kurt's poetry over there called Laces Tight. I have a copy of that. And actually our library has the culture of messenger bags, I think, and we have aerosol culture, if I'm not mistaken. So you all can check out these books.
And fresh plywood.
And fresh plywood. And I have a copy of fresh plywood too. So if anybody wants to see those, you can check them out. I could go on all night talking about Kurt, but I think I should let Kurt tell his own story, which is why we have him here. So Kurt, I'll hand things over to you and have you tell us about yourself and how you got started and some of the work that you've done and some of your observations about graffiti as you see it in New York. And I've got all of your images loaded here, so just tell me whenever you want me to go forward to some images.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Cambridge Heights, New York. It's a suburban neighborhood in Queens, New York City. It's 90% African American. So my neighbors were nurses, lawyers, doctors, that kind of thing. So and everybody owned a house mostly. I grew up there, and to speed it up, I in high school, the neighborhood started to change a little bit, and this is 1975, 76, and I saw the changes happening. Gangs were coming from the Bronx and Brooklyn. They were populating out in Queens and initiating members out in Queens where we live, in the middle class neighborhood. And I saw that happening. So like in my senior year in high school, I started writing poetry about kind of like the changes and stuff that were going on. And it wasn't pleasant. A lot of black on black crime and was coming in, and I just wrote about it a lot. Graffiti was around a little bit when I was in high school, 75, 76, but in Queens, there's no subways in the suburban areas where I was. So in order to get to where I live, where my parents lived, you had to take a bus for a 30-minute ride inland to get to our neighborhood, right? So with no kind of subways you can get to right away. And but graffiti had made it out. A lot of us in high school came up with names. We had magic markers, and we were tagging buses in 75 and 76. But we didn't take it seriously, and I had no clue about what was happening on trains. So that's kind of like where I was. But I always had a interest in documenting Black culture. One of my favorite poets was Langston Hughes, and I would read his stuff, and then I would try to write my poetry in semblance to like Langston Hughes by really coming up with nice rhymes that were impactful, but without using like curse words or anything like that. So that's how I tried to model myself on like the Langston Hughes, Nikki Giovanni, Maya Angelou, and Gwendolyn Brooks, try to model myself in terms of writing my poetry on urban culture. And so I started that in high school, and now I'm up to, I don't know, like 20 books and 500 poems. So this is not what we're talking about here today, but we're going to get into that. But I'm a poet by nature, but that's how I got into street culture, right? It's through my poetry, right? And through sneakers, right? So sneakers were a part of our culture in the mid 70s, 74, 75. All us kids wanted the latest sneakers, and so if you're a young Black youth back then, if you had the best looking sneaker, you were like the coolest kid, right? And they had a number of brands, Adidas, Nike wasn't too big back in 75, but it was Adidas, Pro Kids, Converse, those are like the brands. And you would wear your sneakers to look good. And at that time, you also, as this little crime element was entering to the Black community, there was activity that was trying to prevent that. And what I mean by that, individuals would have parties, right, to kind of boost the spirits of the youth. And then you would have DJs come to these parties and play the music, right? And so in my neighborhood, they had the DJs out there, and it was kind of like disco where I was, but hip hop was coming, but it wasn't like the Bronx, right? Or the South Bronx. It was more like, disco music and doing the hustle. Whereas in the Bronx, it was more breaking. Breaking was starting to come out in the late 70s. So I was kind of documenting these things, and later it would become known as hip hop culture, right? And then as everybody still there? I saw Heather's screen.
Yeah, we're all here. We're all here.
So you lost. All right, yeah. So anyway, getting back, I went to college and stuff, and kept writing poetry about urban culture. But in the 90s, when this subculture actually got identified, that I was talking about a little bit, about the dancing, the music, and the sneakers, they identified it as like hip hop, right? And then that started to become like really, really popular. And I was active in that, and I wrote about that. And that's a lot of that materials in my books. But to speed it up to in terms of how I got into art itself, I really started running into early graffiti artists, I would say in the mid to 2000, just when I just started including photography into my craft. So I was writing about it, but I started including photographs into documenting what I was seeing. So now I'm not just writing, I'm taking photographs of the scene. So on my job, they would have my coworkers, some of them were involved with the early graffiti arts movement. So one of my coworkers, his name was Carl Weston. And Carl Weston, he had a video magazine called Videograph. And what Carl would do, he would follow graffiti artists as they paint the trains. He would interview them and he would put them into these video, what he called video magazines, right? So a video magazine may have like 5 artists in it, and they would be interviewing those artists, but they would also show them painting trains. So he interviewed I'll just say two well-known artists. One was Phase 2, and another one is Claus, Kaws. So Claus was an early graffiti writer. Obviously, he became a well-known artist, but my friend Carl Weston, he has video of him painting, early graffiti style. And that's what he did. So he had videograph. He was a co-worker of mine, right? And coincidentally, he lived with a gentleman called Henry Chaffron. And him and Martha Kufa did the book Subway Art. Now, is that book, have they looked at that book in the class yet or no? Subway
No,
Art.
we haven't looked at it, no.
All right, so my friend Carl Weston, he co-worker, he lived with Henry Chaffron, and he would bring me to Henry Chaffron's house, and I met him. So I was getting a little entree into the art form and learning as much about it as possible. So bringing it up to today, whereas I'm helping people who are around my age in their 60s who are pioneers, and I'm helping them tell stories, their story. So for example, an artist I'm working with right now, his name is Butch 2 TFP. And Heather, could you pull up a cover of the book? And maybe that's my first image of Butch 2. It's a book cover. Do you have it? Oh, right there. Right after this image is the next image. Yeah.
Oh, here.
Right there. Hit that
Sorry.
one.
Yeah. There we go.
All right. So Butch 2 was a early writer. A lot of these early writers, they call themselves writers. They didn't call themselves graffiti artists. Graffiti was associated with vandalism, and they didn't really want to be known as vandals. They really wanted to be known as artists. Though they were painting on the trains illegally, they still wanted to be known as writers. But the press called them vandals and graffiti artists. And so but the artists themselves shied away from that. So Butch is one of the early guys. He grew up in the Bronx, South Bronx. He started painting trains when he was 12 years old. And he was good at it. And he was able to paint whole cars. So that's one of his whole car images on the cover. And then on the back cover is an image of Butch and then his partner, Case 2. And Case 2, he was known as the King of Style. And he passed away maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And but he was really well known as the King of Style. There's not much material about him outside of like some photos of his work, but a lot of Case 2's originals didn't survive. So and Case 2 would paint with just one arm. So he was handicapped, but he's really good at painting. So that wall is Butch and Case together, and they were partners up in the Bronx for many years. So if we go to the next slide, we can see another one of Butch's. Okay, so it's another one of Butch's cars, right? It takes you really back into the early form of this style, called it style writing, right? He's taking his name. He's got arrows in it. He's got bubble letters. He's doing stuff to make his name look really stylish. So that's another one of Butch's cars. Go to the next slide. All right, and these are the top ones on the cover, and this other one is another whole car, and those are like block letters. So you can imagine being in a station and seeing something like that come out a station. It would probably be pretty amazing. So so that's another car that a couple of cars he did. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and that's another one that he did. So it gives you an idea of the style that Butch too did as an artist. He stopped painting for a long time. So like the last 2 years I've been working with him, he just started painting again. And he wasn't part of the first graffiti artist wave that would go in galleries. He didn't paint canvases in the early 80s. So after high school, he basically dropped doing graffiti on the train. There was no money in it at that time. So a lot of artists left. So it wasn't unusual for Butch to stop painting trains, but he left. So now he's starting to paint canvases. I'm working with him, and that book cover should be out. The book actually should be out around June and July. So we go to the next slide. All right, so this is going to bring you up to date. So you're going to go, you just went from the early 70s to what it is today. So this is a image of two artists, prolific graffiti artists. One is Optimal. And Heather, did you make a presentation where I put the hashtag? I have the Instagrams in my email to you, or you can provide that to them if they want to follow up.
I did not put the hashtags in, but I can line them up and send them to people later.
Yeah, just send them their
I'll do that.
That'd be helpful. But you can blow it back up. Yeah, you go. Blow it. Okay. So this is Optimo. So Optimo is spelled OPTIMO NYC. So if you do Optimo NYC on Instagram, it'll come up. So his character is like the little man with the top hat on. So he would do these men all around the city with this character, right? And that was like one of his signatures. So this is kind of like kind of like a commission wall. So he didn't do this one illegally. He knew the owner, but he's known for doing a lot of illegal stuff. So, but he's one of the top guys that's on the street today. That's doing a lot of street art on buildings, stuff like that, or what you call graffiti style. He's Optimal. And then there's another one within the man. There's like almost Arabic letters, right? And those are kind of like words. I don't know what those words are, but the artist who does that, he does that not just in New York, but he does it on freight cars. He does it in Los Angeles. He travels around. So him and Optimo, his name is Duel, Duel, right? And they collaborate on the front of that building. So if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see the artist, how it looks on the side. So you can see these guys are very good artists, and they're able to really create characters, use colors to really make it like an inspiring wall. But then on the top of that, some other graffiti artists put their tag on top of it. And if you go a little higher, you'll see something on the other part of the building up a little higher. It had no association with these two artists, Dual and Optimal. But it'll give you an idea of what's happening like in New York City. And you could go around the 5 boroughs and you could find pockets of this kind of art, you know, from different artists. And there's a lot of artists out there today. So this is Dual and Optimal. Let's go to the next slide. So this is another artist. He was really prolific during the summer reckoning. Some scholars are calling that. A lot of quite a few African Americans were murdered by police, and there was a lot of protests, and that includes Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Just they put them into all like the same kind of category, but George Floyd was like a tipping point, and that caused a global protest. So this artist here, his name is Sule, and he's actually painting on a building in Brooklyn. And this was a commissioned building that he's doing. So these artists fluctuate from going to places that they don't have permission to getting commissioned. But you get a reputation out there if you do a lot of places without permission. You become like a pariah, what you kind of say. And they use that as street cred, almost like the 70s, except they're not doing trains, they're doing walls and buildings and stuff. So, but Sule, that's him at work. He was a prolific artist during the summer of reckoning 2020. He's in my book, Fresh Plywood. He did a lot of murals, protesting, racism during that period. And that's his image of him at work painting. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so if you come to New York today, you're going to see murals like this, real fine murals, sporadically all over the city. And when you see a fine mural like this, it's a commissioned mural, right? And they're all over the 5 boroughs. So you can go from seeing like illegal walls to seeing fine art on a tall building. And I don't know who the artists are on that one, but that's one of the pictures I took just to show as an example of like what's happening in New York City today. And this is in Chelsea, the Chelsea district. So let's go to.
Do you think that's Cobra? I think that might be Cobra. Kobra. He's Brazilian. He painted the Bob Dylan mural here in Minneapolis. I think that's who that is.
That's what it is. Okay, it could. Yeah, probably is. He's a really good one. The name is at the top. I would have to blow it up. His name is like right above the Basquiat.
Yeah.
The artist name. So I just need to. But we could figure it out. But
yeah,
when you after class, they can look at it closely.
Sure.
But the name is at the top of that. There. Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. All right. So this is kind of like traditional graffiti. And you may have a lot of this in Minneapolis as well. But this is in Brooklyn. It's a building, right? And just artists, they all come and they paint their tags, right? And you can find this kind of stuff all around the city. In Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, it's everywhere. And that's kind of like what's exactly like going on today. It's like you can see the varieties from murals to commission pieces to straight up graffiti. That's what it kind of looks like today in the various neighborhoods. Not every building, but a lot of buildings have that on it. All right, and then we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is a group that puts on a mural festival every year in Brooklyn. It's called the Bushwick Collective. And they hire mural artists from around the world. They come to Brooklyn and they paint murals. And then they have a big party for the public, right? And they get popular rap artists and bands to come and they perform live. And then you just walk around the neighborhood and you'll see all these like beautiful murals. And so this is the Bushwick Collective. So it happens every summer. I don't know if it's August or July, but they had it last year. So, but it's the Bushwick Collective. I did put their Instagram into my email, so you're able to look at that. So you go to the next slide. And that's another mural in Bushwick. Has the Bushwick Collective on it. I don't know who the artist is on that, but it gives you an example of what this collective is doing with mural art and street art. It's almost like a beautification campaign where you're taking the building and instead of a whole bunch of tags, you're putting like a painting there, and that's what the Bushwick Collective does. So and that's another one of the pieces. We go to the next one. All right, so that's another huge mural that is in Bushwick. And you can see the details on what they painted and the characters. And then you see also the tags on the side of it, which it doesn't, the tags, I just noticed that the tagging artist didn't paint on the animal. They have some respect for this artist. So they kept it clean. So it's a good example of, how a lot of things happen on the streets. Some artists respect other artists, and if they see your mural, they're not going to paint on it. They may paint on the side of it, but artists want to be respected. So, it's good to have a good reputation. If you're going to be a graffiti artist, it's not to paint over other graffiti artists. And that's a good way to get around. So, but it's a really, really nice piece. I liked it. I wanted to kind of show you guys of like what's happening in this neighborhood called Bushwick. It's in Brooklyn, right? And in the next slide, I believe, okay, so this is it's another Bushwick Collective, but this artist is very prolific. Her name is Lexi Bella. And she's really a prolific mural artist in New York City. And a lot of her murals are all around the city. She does beautiful work. And she's part of this group, the Bushwick Collective. So you get a really good, she gives a really good art presentation on the streets. And I really love her work. And so the next one is another artist at work. Okay, so this is a hangout spot. It's in Soho, right? And it's one of the original art stores for graffiti artists. It's called Scrapyard. And it's been around 30 years. They have a long history. And these are two artists painting their gate as a commission, right? One is Bush Camp and the other one is Silk Eyelashes. And this is something, if you come to New York and you want to study like street art, you want to pay a visit to Scrapyard because there's just so much history here that you can just learn so much. And they still sell spray paint and markers. So it's a great place to kind of visit. So you go to the next slide. All right, so this is a classic artist at work, right? They're holding their spray paint cans and, proving they know the art, how to use these spray paint cans. Now, the spray paint can is really a tool that these artists a master versus the paintbrush, right? Some still use brushes, but a lot of these artists are using spray paint cans to do their masterpieces with, and it's a very intricate art form in itself. So so these are two guys showing their spray paint cans, and that's kind of like a new photo series I'm working on as well, just photographing master street artists using their tool, which is a spray paint can. This little photo series I'm working on that I've been just going around New York, different cities, photographing the artists at work. And so this is an example of, you know, how these artists look, you know, and how they handle their spray paint cans. So and before I go into the subway art today, which is I believe, Heather, you have the train, right? The New York Daily News article. You have the link for that. So, but I'll open it up if any student has questions, anything. Or Heather, you have any questions?
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing for a minute so we can see each other. Yeah, so I sent out the link to the article to everybody. So I don't know if people had a chance to read it yet because I just sent it today.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about train graffiti. We've talked about subway graffiti making a resurgence during these days and during the lockdown. So it's kind of a familiar idea to people, but it's great. Do we have some questions right now? Kurt has some more slides to show, but if you want to throw some questions up, you're welcome to shout them out, throw them in the chat now or at any time. You can ask some questions.
All right. We could also keep it moving. So should we show the New York Daily News piece, or we just move to the next?
I gave it to everybody to read, so maybe we should.
All right, that's great. All right, let's leave it at that. So let's. So do you want to start on the protest art?
Yeah, sure. You want to go back to the slideshow?
Yeah, we could go to.
Okay.
Go back to the folder.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions though? You're welcome to throw them up in the chat or unmute yourself and talk if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead. All right.
I guess I've got one. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. So most of the essays that we've been reading is that in combination of both being illegal, you know, for Tay in the early days in the 70s and stuff, maybe it kind of follows today. But one of the things was that to truly make it graffiti, not only was it kind of illegal to do your basically writing in somebody else's public space, but you had to steal the supplies, right? So does that still seem to hold? So once you became a street artist and you were on this kind of commission basis, right? It wasn't, they were really looking to be monetized or get paid for it. They wanted the space and the recognition. Was it still a case that, how do they come by their supplies? Is it kind of a bartering deal with the people that own the space, or is it still kind of like, kind of a little shady there to still get the supplies to complete the work?
All right, so the folklore, in fact, of how these artists got the supplies is they stole them. So these kids in the Bronx and Brooklyn, you know, they 12, 13, 14 years old, you know, your parents ain't buying you 10 cans of Krylon B. So,
Yeah.
So they had these cliques and they would go to hardware stores and they would steal it. You know, so it was like, okay, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, let's cut school. And the term they use is racking, R-A-C-K-I-N-G. And they would gather together, cut class, and say, let's go racking. And then when it's evening, they'll go to the train yard and they would paint the trees. And it would go on for years and years and years until like MTA, you know, caught on to it. And then eventually, if you go into a hardware store in New York today, the paint cans are on lock and key. You can't get them.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you just can't go in there and take them. You have to get somebody security to unlock it. And there's many stories. Like I just did a oral history series with 3 artists, and they all talk about racking in those documentary series, you know, and they're going to be up for public record because I'll be able to share it. But I think a lot of these kids, they're 60 now, right? So you can't go back 40 years and like prosecute them for a crime that they did. So they don't care, but it's like a badge, right?
But I was just curious if they continue to rack, right? Like, as you're pushed in it from the MTA, like they're pushed out of like tagging on trains, they go into spaces where they're getting commissioned. So they weren't getting paid. It was an agreement between the space owner and the artist, right? So okay, so they're no longer going to get prosecuted for painting the space, but how do they still get the supplies, right? If they're not getting paid, and I'm not really I mean, is it more of a hobby and it's like I've collected it and this is what I want to do? Or is it like I'm still having to acquire my paints illegally?
All right, so the artists that are doing it today, there's a number of ways they get to paint. And I'll just give you 3, right? The first way is they buy it. Because you can't steal it no more. So they buy it. Second way, they get sponsorship. Now, sponsorship could be 2 ways, because some of the paint companies, they hire graffiti artists to be, sponsor, like an athlete.
Yeah.
They sponsor them, they give them free paint.
Yeah.
And we never have to worry about a can of paint because you're such a good artist. The paint company is going to sponsor you. So like, for example, they got Montana, right? Montana spray paint can. You go to their site, and you're an artist and you can show them your portfolio, you could ask them for free paint, right? And then the other way is getting commission. So I did a commission for a clothing store, right? Part of the budget was the artist fee, and the other part was for paint, right? And that's how the contract was written, right? And so that's how the artists are kind of getting their supplies now. So either they're buying it themselves, they have a direct sponsorship relationship with the spray paint company, or the company that's asking them to do the mural, they pay for it. Plus they labor. So those are kind of like the 3 ways. But
so amongst the artists, though, one of the things was like if you were a true tagger or a writer back in the day, like it seemed like it was like a badge of honor. You had to steal the paint on top of doing the action. So if you were moving into street art, you're being commissioned, you weren't really stealing the paint anymore, right? Maybe you aged out. I figure that may be one thing, right? You get over the age of 18 and you're going to get prosecuted and go to jail for big time rather than juvie. Then would the other artists around you look down on the fact that you're now having to buy your paint or getting your supplies legally rather than the illegal method? Did that kind of change over the time?
Well, I would say there's some age gaps, right?
Yeah.
So those artists coming from the early 70s to maybe the mid 1980s, they're around my age. They're 60 something. Some are pushing 70. So a lot of them are not even painting anymore. And if they are painting, it's on a very limited scale.
Oh no, yeah. I guess I was reflecting on your own youth and earlier back in the day, how artists looked at one another as they moved into the street art aspect of it, right? And so I'm thinking what kind of your impression from like the 80s, 90s time frame from your own perspective, like how artists looked upon one another as they shifted from the subway system to street art, and now they're going more legal, right? Where they're like, you sold out. Or,
no, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. If you were one of those early subway riders and your paintings are selling for $100,000 now, you got respect. It was more of a personal decision between each artist, because also some of these artists went to jail, right? Not for painting, right? For other crimes, right? So you're living in what you would call impoverished neighborhood in a sense, and there's drugs, there's gang violence. So, and there's no money in graffiti.
Yeah.
So you're trying to survive that. And only a few artists were able to get like picked up in the late 70s, so like the Basquiat and Keith Haring, they were two like downtown artists, but there were other street artists like Futura, who crossed over pretty early, but he didn't go to jail. He went in the army or Navy, I forget what, but he went in the military. He got away from the hood, right? So he just got away from it. Then he came back, started painting again, but not on trains, doing like canvases and stuff. So Futura, this other guy, Lee Quinones, right? Those are two guys that were early subway riders. Now, Lee Quinones, he kind of almost did the most trains with whole cars. If you ever get a chance to like see some, if you Google his name, Lee Quinones, and you look at some of the photos of some of his train masterpieces, you would be amazed that this guy was doing this at 14 years old. But now, he's in a show now at Phillips Auction on Park Avenue, and he has some of his sketches that he did before he painted the train, and he's selling those sketches for $300,000. So yeah, I was like,
All right.
and he's respected with the guys who went to jail. It was just more about, to those guys, wasn't the vandalism part, is how good you could paint, right? So if you could really paint good, they didn't care which way you went. You always gonna have respect. And that's at the end of the day. This guy can paint, and their own personal choice is up to them, whichever way they went.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. No problem, man.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again, Kurt. So you've got this. Oops, that's the wrong thing.
Oh, okay. We can go to Butch. Let's go to Butch. Can you play that clip?
Yeah, I'll play this clip. Can you hear it okay if I play it?
Yeah.
All right, so this is a clip of an interview that Kurt did with Butch for the Bronx Oral History Center. And you want to just play like a minute or so, is that right, Kurt?
Yeah, I wanted to play can you see the section?
Yeah, I'm at 36:33.
Painting the whole car.
Yeah, I'll start it. We'll see if everybody can hear okay.
It's a production. Production is just, you gotta have a theme. Sometimes you have to have a blueprint. Yeah, it's really obvious. And then you have to paint. Yeah. Sometimes.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Oh, you started it over, so you have to go back.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I don't know what's going on. We're about here, right?
Have a blueprint.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's really obvious. And then you have to paint. Yeah. Sometimes it's teamwork. You have certain guys that are, like back then when we was on the 6s and some of the early days on the 5, I'm like the not to brag, but the brains of the whole operation. Sure. I can do the outlines, everybody's. While he's coming behind me, filling in. Yeah. Then I'll come back to do the 3D. And then all the way down while he's doing, it was an operation. Wow. And yeah, it was the objective was to do the whole car. Even if you just did 3 different names, connected them with a cloud, and then just did all kind of explosions and stuff just to cover the whole train. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How old were you when you did your first entire car?
I think I did a silver and black top to bottom when I was about 13. Wow. Because I remember, and I had that picture.
Okay, we can cut it.
Photo albums.
Okay. I just want to give them like a little teaser, and if they want to see the whole video, they're welcome to.
Yeah, the link is up on this first slide that shows Butch too. That's a live link there, so you can listen to the whole interview. It's really
Yeah,
great.
because oh, great.
It's really great. Yeah.
I think they'll find it fascinating.
I can see you smiling when you watch it, Kurt. I'm sure it was fun to do. And in fact, even that little clip, it answers questions that people were having about graffiti culture and about working together and how you envision a whole train when you're going to paint it, right?
Yeah, right. And you're under pressure, right? Kind of like it's illegal, right? So you got to watch out for the cops. There's a lot kind of going on. But I think the key is the age, right? 13, 14. They're really, really young. So, yeah. So, okay. So I should say after the murder of George Floyd, all right, protests occurred all around the world. And it was no different than in New York City. So this photo is, I think, the tragedy of George Floyd was like in end of May. So I believe this photo is from like June or early July. And this is someone put this sign up on a telephone. And I just thought that was very like powerful image, a powerful protest. White silence is violent. White silence is violent. And I took a picture of it, and I just thought it was a very powerful statement. And I wanted to kind of just start it off with there, just to give an example of like what was happening in New York and how people were on the streets. And eventually will lead up into how artists got involved and they really started painting intricate murals in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And because the Black Lives Matter movement was kind of like the connecting dot for all these cities all around the world to mobilize so quickly. This protest, this explosion of protests around the world happened so quickly. And that is because the connection of the internet and Black Lives Matter having members all around the world. So this is the image I shot. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is a hardcore kind of graffiti image. This is an upscale store. So this store is, the name of the store is Prada, Prada. They make some of the most expensive women's clothing in the world. They're based out of Italy, right? And they put up their boards. And this happened like a couple of, maybe 10 days after George Floyd got killed in Minneapolis, where you guys are, right? And they put Black Lives Matter, they put FUCK, the NYPD. I think FUK has something to do with FUCK, NYPD. I don't know the letter. I know it has something to do with hating the police. And so that was on the Prada store. And that's in Soho. So it's an upscale neighborhood in New York for shopping. And that's an image of, how people felt about, Black lives and police brutality. It reached a boiling point, and it got to the front door of Soho district, which is unheard of. You could never really do that without some sort of powerful movement to get you in there like that, because those stores are really protected, and the police guard this community a lot. So because there was so many people, like the protests their voices could be heard, right? And so that's an example of, the power of graffiti to get your voices heard. And I don't know, Heather, are you start teaching about how graffiti is being used in different ways outside of vandalism. You know, like the statues in Charlottesville was painted graffiti on it, and the only choice they had was to take it down and remove it, right? So have y'all discussed, what graffiti is, how it's being used today in different forms?
We're only in week 3 of our class, so we haven't gotten there yet, but we will.
All right, great. All right, so let's go
Yeah,
to the
it's still
next.
early.
It's still early, great. All
Yeah.
right. All right, so this is, I'm sure some of the students might have heard about, Asian hate. And this is a mural done by an artist. His name is Hectag. And he put "Stop Asian Hate" on a retail store gate, right? And this gate is really near Chinatown. So that's another way of how graffiti is being used as a political act. And it's a powerful message. And the artist did a good job to make sure, like, it's being seen and visible. So that's another image in New York. We can go to the next slide. All right, so this is another retail store. And this is when a lot of artists started to use their talents, right? And this is Aldo, a popular shoe store since Soho. And you see on the left side, there's the Black Power fist, right? You got Love You in the middle. And you have Celebrate Your Freedom of Juneteenth. And you have another Black Lives Matter. So there's a lot going on in that one store. A lot of artists have something to say. So, and I'm sure, like in Minneapolis, they had a lot of boards as well. Is that correct, Heather? There were a lot of,
correct. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the same thing you're observing here. Like a lot of times, it would start out with graffiti that was really raw. It was really just expressing what people were feeling at that moment of protest, and then it became more visual, moved towards more visual works instead of just words too, as time went on.
Right. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So this is another way how someone is taking the Black Lives Matter movement and bringing it out of the police brutality realm and more using it for women's rights, right? Voting is a superpower. Use it or use it, don't lose it. And so the artist is saying, and I believe that's the judge, right? That recently passed away, right? Would I be right about that? Yeah. So, and it's interesting how the artist put her name there, right? Mm-hmm. So people could see it. So she wasn't hiding her identity, even though she's painting on a retail store that she might or might not have had approval for, right? So, but some of these pieces that were made in New York, quite a few of them were stolen. And the artists don't know where some of these art pieces are. But this is a way of, another political way of using your art in a way that voices could be heard in a positive light. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is another intricate artwork. The artist kind of put a lot of time into it. Has a Black Panther in it. It has a multinational different flags. Quote from Angela Davis. Quote from Malcolm X. There's a lot going on, right? And I don't know what happened to this particular piece, but it was a really nice piece. And again, you could see the artist put their name right there at the bottom. Now, Heather, when I was in Minneapolis, we talked a little bit about why artists came to Soho, and we discussed a little bit about, well, Soho is well known for artists. And so the reason why many artists might have came out is because of being seen. Do you still have like any thoughts on that? Like why so many artists came to like Soho and didn't not touch any of the other major neighborhoods in New York?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like there's art galleries there, there's dealers there's people gonna see their names, and people are gonna take pictures and put them on Instagram. So I can see how it's a great place for visibility. Kind of like here in the Twin Cities, a lot of artists painted in Uptown for the same sort of reason, a more upscale commercial area. So you could get a lot of visibility in those neighborhoods. But also, here it's like around the sites of protests. And there were protests around Soho too, weren't there?
What's the question?
Were there a lot of protests around Soho?
Oh yeah. This was the protest. The artists were able to do this because of the protest. So the protest lasts from, I would say, I think Mr. Floyd was murdered like May 25th. So protests last from say May 27th to maybe the last few weeks in September.
Mm-hmm.
And this is every day.
Yeah.
Right? So it didn't stop.
Yeah.
So it just every day. And they had this Instagram site where you can go to. It had George Floyd's name on it. I can't think of it offhand, but you go to this website, I mean, this Instagram every day, and they would tell you where the latest marches were.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just follow that Instagram. It was, a lot of times it was just almost the same people. Same people. Maybe close to maybe 500, and they would all go to different marches and stuff. And then there's one that was quite a big leader, and he now he's a politician in City Hall, right? So he took all that activism and he turned it into a political career, to get justice. So, that was kind of like the top people had a sense that, okay, I can get in this protest movement, make a voice for myself, and then get in the system and try to make changes in the system. Mm-hmm. So, and the artists themselves, a lot of these pieces have their name on it. So I don't know why the artists might put their name on it outside of they getting credit for it. Because a lot of pieces were stolen. So it didn't come back to them, but I guess they were like proud to be out there, to be in support of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, which makes sense because I think creating the art is itself a kind of protest. It's a way of participating in the movement too. So putting your name on that is a declaration of support in a way also, isn't it?
Yeah, and pride. Pride,
yeah.
Right? So let's go to the next slide. All right, so this one's in Brooklyn. I put this in here because I just saw the intricate artwork. Change, we need change. I really thought the artist did an amazing job. Really great image, and I think it had a lot of impact. Now this section of Brooklyn, it was an empty lot. There wasn't a building there. So whoever owned that lot, they put plywood all around the lot. And then they invited a lot of artists to come paint there, to paint on the plywood. Political messages though. Everything on these plywoods on this lot were all like political messages. And the artists had time to really create nice pieces. But I like this piece, we need change. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is an artist. His name is a creator. And he does some really nice pieces, large scale pieces. This was in support of small businesses in New York in 2020. Really dynamic piece showing his ability to paint, and it's a beautiful piece. Unfortunately, I believe the creator doesn't have this piece, so it was stolen from him. Don't know where it's going to end up, but it happened to quite a few artists, and these pieces are really large scale. So we're talking like 8 feet by 10 feet. You know, they're really big, and they're large plywood, so they're pretty heavy. So whoever was taking these down had to be pretty strong to take it down. But they were doing it, but they were pretty large. But this is a creator, so it's a really nice piece. Let's go on to, and that was in Soho as well. Okay, so this is another one on the Brooklyn lot that I was just mentioning about the owner letting the artist paint whatever they wanted, except it was political. So Trump equals racism. We voted him out. Rise and resist. Now on this piece, the artist didn't leave his name, so I don't know who the artist is on this one. And I believe in Minneapolis, there were a lot of boards too where artists didn't leave their name, right?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, yeah.
So, but that's another good board. Let's go to the next one. So this is another artist. He's about 20, 21. And he was the most prolific artist in Soho during the Black Lives Matter protests. His name is Amir Diop. And he would paint over 50 boards. And white privilege, the problem that needs to be addressed, right, in this piece. And he also got his board stolen as well. So, but it's another large scale piece, 10 feet by 10 feet, and pretty heavy, but it shows you his skill level in terms of painting large scale pieces. And he was really prolific during the Black Lives Matter movement. And now you can see like a lot of these things are like different from the early train era, right? So we have almost like a 50-year time span from doing fancy letters in different styles with your name to the like elaborate art pieces on walls and plywood. But it's continue a tradition of like urban art. There's a category now called urban art, right? And you could just see like the difference from maybe those early train pieces to where they are today, and how the art form is kind of expanding a bit. All right, and so let's go to the next slide. All right, so I'll put this last slide, because this is Amir Diop. I'll put this last slide in to give you an idea of like why the artists going on the streets to paint. Why are they painting illegal walls or commission walls in the first place? Is because they want to be known. So it goes way back into Keith Haring and Basquiat. Why did they paint on the street? They wanted to be seen and known. So that's still really prevalent today, with artists going to the streets, getting street cred, and then taking that street cred and bringing that street cred into the gallery, except on canvases and not on walls. And so this is Amir Diop. This is his first solo show in Route to Positivity. And that kind of gives you, an idea of where from the beginning those early years to where it is today. So I would kind of end it on that. And then if some have questions regarding the whole presentation, and you can talk about anything, whatever you want.
Well, there's a question in the chat that I want to bring up, Kurt, because I think it actually relates really nicely to what you were talking about before and to your own work too. Sebi, I'm looking at your question. I don't know if you want to unmute and read it or if you want me to ask the question for you.
Oh yeah, I was kind of just wondering if actually let me read my comment. If the attire or the way they dressed, graffiti artists, if that really matters to them. If they want to like look cool while they do their art, or I don't know. If you could just explain on that a little bit.
Most artists that I encountered, and I've encountered a lot of them, no one dresses fancy. They all wear beat up jeans, beat up t-shirts. If you catch them painting, you're going to see paint on their shirts, their pants, their sneakers. You know, they just, when they're out there on the streets, you know, painting, they're going to just be grungy, right? You're not going to be fancy. So no one's dressing up out there at all. Everybody's, you know, looking like they're I won't say a painter because they don't have a dress code for street artists. They all dress differently, but they're wearing like, you know, beat up jeans, beat up t-shirts, you know, stuff that they probably use a lot that, you know, they don't care about. But when they get dressed up, like that last photo I show of Ramir, he's looking kind of swanky and clean.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this.
It's like the style follows what the street artists are wearing, right? They're not trying to look cool, but street style follows what street artists are doing.
Oh, okay, that's what you mean. Okay, so no, they don't. Not if I think the closest thing you can do in that vein is skateboarding kids. So skateboarding kids have a certain cachet with their style, and that's emulated in streetwear, right? Whereas street artists, there is some that take their art and they try to put it into street fashion, you know, but very few are like really successful. Most who are street artists who are successful in fashion, they're doing collaborations. So a guy like Futura, you know, when you see him on the street, he's not really dressed up. But when you buy one of his pieces on a clothes, or if you buy one of his Nike sneakers, it's because these clothing companies took his art and they made it really appealing in apparel or sneakers. So there's quite a few artists that have collaboration with sneaker companies, you know, but that's like a packaging deal, right? So I hire you to give me an art piece, and then that sneaker company will put it on the sneaker, kind of like as a limited release. So for example, there's an artist who just did a collaboration with this basketball player, Kevin Durant. He plays with the Brooklyn Nets. And the artist's name is Ron English. So Ron English, you know, you see him, he's a regular guy. You know, he's not fancy dressed or anything, if I'm getting it right. And then they took his characters that he paints, and Kevin Durant, they put it on Nike sneakers. And then when I was talking with Ron and asked him, okay, do you have a pair? He said, I don't have a pair. I couldn't get a own pair of my own sneaker design. So that's how that is. But usually
that goes way back. The next thing we're going to look at in class is actually Keith Haring and the Crack is Whack Playground, and he made sneakers of those back in the 80s, like 86. I think there were some Nike Crack is Whack shoes.
Oh yeah. I mean,
and then like Swatch watches back in the 80s too.
Yeah,
a bunch of art stuff.
Yeah, so as an artist, you can do all kinds of collaborations, you know, with your art. But if I may not answer the question right, but you know, if it's a personal look on how they how they mostly look on everyday life is they're not fashionable. They're regular people. It's almost like the internet guys, like Mark Zuckerberg, right? He'll go to work. He's a billionaire. He'll go to work with sneakers, some jeans, and t-shirts, right? He only got like $1,000 suit on, right? So that's how these artists kind of look, you know, and also street culture is good because if you look at how street fashion is today, you see like cut up jeans. You could buy a pair of cut up jeans for $300. It's it's an interesting like phenomenon how street art works, but I won't spend too much more time at the question, but I love that question, but thank you so much. So.
That's a good question. We have time for one more question, I think, before we wrap up. Is there one more question that somebody would like to throw out there? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute if you'd like to and talk.
I guess I'll ask, do you at all like feel like these artists are being like not given enough recognition for like when they do use their art on brands or stuff like that, and like the people who might buy them don't understand the whole culture of street art and like their process of making this? Like I know Keith Haring, for example, is very overused in like clothing to the extent that some people don't even know he's the artist. Like I'm sure he's universally recognizable as an artist, but some people don't even know his process or like how like that he made that. So like I just like wonder if some of these artists are maybe like not getting enough recognition.
Yeah, I mean, well, on the ground, I would say like those who are being in street art, something like a Keith Haring, right? A lot of those artists want street credibility, right? So the more you get up out there on the street and people get to know your name, right? You get more kind of well known. And by word of mouth, street credibility equals you being legit, and you being legit equals coming into a brand situation saying, hey, I got street cred, right? I was out there. And then the brand want to be authentic. So if a brand is going to collaborate with an artist, they want that artist to be authentic. They don't want to have like a person that really never painted in the street and then getting his name on the sneaker because he's not street credible. So it's kind of like you got to do the dirt in order to get the fame. It's kind of weird, but that's what they do. And I don't know, maybe that's why street art is street art. You got to go to the street to get the credibility, and it's gonna be some consequences to achieve that success if that's what you want to do, you know. And I believe Keith Haring, he's got some I think he went to jail one time, or maybe a couple of times for going out there. He seemed to not care about painting on the streets. You know, it just seemed not to care, so he did it. So, but you know, you become famous after a while if you get well known enough, and you live with the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a great question, and it's definitely one we'll return to later on in the semester. I think we're out of time, Kurt. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
We could probably go on all night, but our class actually ends in just a few minutes, and we've kept you for a long time too. But if you don't mind, if people have other questions, I might shoot you an email later on too, if people want to get some responses to things. And
absolutely.
Have you back another time too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much. And if you need the Instagram for some of the artist names I mentioned, please let me know. I'll give you those Instagram accounts. And, social media is a good way to keep up with art these days. A lot of good things are on the internet now.
And everybody can follow you on Instagram.
That's right. You can follow me. I have 2 accounts. You can follow me at my name, Kurt Boone Photography, or my Messenger account, which is Messenger and the number 841. So at Messenger 841, those are like my two mainstay Instagram accounts. And so I really thank the university, St. Thomas University, for having me. And Ezra, I really appreciate this opportunity. And maybe I can be back again someday.
That would be
I would love
great.
to be back.
It's an
Yeah.
honor for us, and it's great for us to be able to hear from you. Thank you so much for coming.
All right.
We will give you a round of applause, and I will stop recording now. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.